Welcome to another Apollo Papyrus podcast episode. I am Aaron Apollo Camp. For this episode, my interview guest is an author, poet, writer, publishing imprint owner, and YouTube channel host, and in addition to that, he was previously a cable television screenwriter. As an author and poet, he has written the works of fiction The Strange Sound of Cthulhu and Wizard's Song, as well as numerous short story and poetry collections. He has also written the Music Street Journal books and online publication. He runs the Tales of Wonder and Dread publishing imprint, and he runs the Spooky Ventures YouTube channel. His name is Gary Hill, also known as Scary Gary and D.B. Lovecraft, and my interview with Gary will follow the teleportation sound. Gary Hill, welcome to the Apollo Papyrus podcast.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Feel free to introduce yourself to our listeners.
My name is Gary Hill, and I write all kinds of different things. I started Music Street Journal in 1998, covering music stuff. And from there, just sort of went on. My first book was called Strange Sound of Cthulhu, music inspired by the writings of H.P. Lovecraft. And it's a nonfiction, literally about music that was inspired by Lovecraft's writings. And that one has been very well received. And then after that, I did another nonfiction music one called Poetry of the Air, which was a bunch of interviews, basically. And then I got into horror and science fiction, and I'm big into spooky stuff anyway. I run a YouTube channel called Spooky Ventures, and I do a horror hosting thing on there where I play Scary Gary and show old movies and stuff. So, that's kind of a sort of a quick summary of who I am. I will say I also have Tales of Wonder and Dread publishing, which I launched, which is all horror and science fiction. Some of it's my books. I have a hand in all of it. I, at the very least, edit and curate them. But most of the time, I'll have at least something in there, but not always. Not always.
You mentioned The Strange Sound of Cthulhu, which is a nonfiction book. Without spoiling too much about that book, what is it about?
Well, it was funny. After doing Music Street Journal for a while, I sort of decided that I wanted to do a book. I thought it was time for me to try to do a book. And I had noticed that there was a lot of music that was based on H.P. Lovecraft's works. And I'm a big H.P. Lovecraft fan. So I thought, well, why don't I start researching that? And so I dug up as much of the music as I could find. I got in touch with as many of the musicians as I could find. And so it basically covers different, like I said, it's not comprehensive. It couldn't be. There's just so much out there. But it covers as much of the music that's inspired by Lovecraft by talking about the music. Whenever I could get a hold of musicians involved, I asked them about the writing process and their favorite Lovecraft stories and things like that. And then it's sort of divided into different sections. There's heavy metal, punk, all kinds of different stuff. It's sort of meant to be a reference book. It's got a whole section in the back where you can look up the artist or the song or whatever and go find it. So it can be read used as a reference book, but it also can be read cover to cover. And it's sort of probably the most academic thing I've ever done because it was intended to be somewhat academic. It has samples of the lyrics compared to some of Lovecraft's text and things like that. I will say, if you're familiar with the Lovecraft scholar S.T. Joshi, he wrote the foreword for me, and he also gave me permission to say he quoted to one of my friends. He said it was one of the most interesting books he's ever read, and he said I could tell people that. So I'm very proud of that.
Another one of your books is called Wizard's Song. Without spoiling too much about that book, what is it about?
Okay, Wizard's Song is kind of interesting. That one's kind of near and dear to my heart. I originally wrote that when I was 12 years old as a comic book. And then in the 1990s, I rewrote it as a novel, and it was kind of clunky and I didn't like it, and it just sort of went away. but it always lived in my head. And so I finally got around to writing it during COVID, basically. I was finishing it up when COVID hit, and I released it right at the start of the pandemic. It's science fiction, and it's centered around a progressive rock band, and they get kidnapped by some kind of aliens into space and taken into space. And I guess basically at the time that I wrote it originally when I was 12, I was very much into Star Trek. I was very much into Marvel Comics superheroes, and I had just discovered progressive rock. And so it sort of combined all of those things into sort of a mesh. And I think the story works pretty well. It's got some themes to it about how art can overcome evil, and how people working together can do a lot more than just individuals can. But it's a fun book. I think it's sort of a space opera kind of thing. I really like that book actually, and I'm actually working on a sequel to it. But that I've been working on, I sort of set it aside for about a year and a half or so, and I want to get back to it. It's probably about, I don't know, a quarter of the way done so far.
What are some short story and poetry collections that you've written?
Well, I just put one out called The Gallery of Oddities, and that one has, I believe, a dozen fiction pieces. I basically collected the stuff I've done since my last one. It has a dozen fiction pieces. Those are all horror. And it's got a bunch of nonfiction, sort of true ghost story type stuff. And then some movie reviews and some music reviews are in there that were published at different places. And then I've got some haikus, some Lovecraftian haikus, and some Christmas horror haikus. Now, all of this stuff was published previously, and most of it was published in books that I've published, but they were sort of scattered all over the place. And then there's one piece, which is a microfiction piece called Green Crunchy Things, which was actually written for a cookbook called Cooks of Horror, where it was from a group on Facebook called Books of Horror. And they asked the horror writers in there if they wanted to submit a recipe and do a short piece of fiction to go with it. So I wrote this little piece called Green Crunchy Things, which is pretty creepy in it. So the first time it's appeared in my books is in this one, Gallery of Oddities. But so I like to sort of gather up the stuff I've done every once in a while. It was 3 years since the last one, and I decided it was time to put this one together because there was enough stuff there.
You're also the writer of the Music Street Journal books and online publication. You've been working on this since the late 1990s.
Yep.
What genres of music does Music Street Journal focus on, and does Music Street Journal just cover the Rockford, Illinois area music scene, or does it cover the music scene in other areas as well?
We cover the music scene everywhere. The primary focus of Music Street Journal is on progressive rock. Half of every issue is progressive rock, at least half. But we also cover heavy metal, and just about anything that gets sent in gets covered. We do reviews and interviews, concert reviews sometimes, and we put out an issue. We were going 6 times a year, and now I've dropped it down to 4 times a year starting this year. But and every single initially it was put out as a Microsoft Word document to several subscribers. I think I had about 30 subscribers for the first issue, just free subscribers. It was like a mailing list. And very quickly after that, I turned it into a website. And then I think it was about 5 years ago, maybe, I decided that it would be a cool idea to publish all of it as in book form. So I went through all the archives and published everything in book form. And then from that point forward, it was actually 2018, I think. From that point forward, every issue goes out at the same time it goes out on the internet. It goes out as a book as well. And each book now has a print edition exclusive that you won't get on the website. Various things, but they're always music related. I think the last one was I did something on songs that were based on horror movies because it was, coming up on Halloween when that issue came out. So yeah, it's quite the undertaking, and it's been around for a long time. I haven't seen visitor numbers for it for a long time since the site got redone. I don't get visitor numbers anymore. But I remember in the early 2000s when I was consistently getting numbers, we were running like over 1 million unique visitors a month, which was pretty awesome. I don't think we get that many anymore, but we still have regular traffic, and I see people sharing the articles every once in a while, and it's kind of cool.
You run the Tales of Wonder and Dread publishing company. Does Tales of Wonder and Dread publish just books by you, or does it publish books written by other authors as well?
The vast majority of the books are either my books or books that are collections that I've curated and edited. But we actually did publish 3 books, a trilogy from Elizabeth Lynn Blackson over the last couple years. And it's Girls Gotta Eat I'm trying to remember. It's the Suffering Sequence trilogy. It's Girls Gotta Eat, Invasive Species, and Old Black Water. Although I just got the order in reverse there. It's the last 2 are Old Black Water, and then Invasive Species is the newest one. And they're really cool books. Elizabeth is a author out of the St. Louis area, and her books they're kind of dark urban fantasy, but they're a lot of horror elements and some science fiction elements, and they're very much adult style reading. But yeah, we published those 3. I'm open to publishing more books from other authors. I would just have to have the right fit and the right author, and something I believed in. My motto for Tales of Wonder and Dread, I'm not like a lot of publishers. I'm not interested in what will sell and what won't sell, because I have literally no idea about that. I'm more of an artist. I'm not really a business person, so I can't guess what's going to sell well. My whole criteria is it a book that I want on my bookshelf? If it is, I'll publish it. And if it sells, then that's just a bonus. But that's not my criteria. And I know a lot of people are very much about the bottom line, and I'm just not who I am.
One of the series of books that's been published through your imprint is Rockford's Final Resting Places, which is about cemeteries in the Rockford, Illinois area. Without spoiling too much of that, what is it about? I think I already answered your question for you.
Those are a series of books I did, and they're literally probably 95% of the books. The content is photographs I took. I love walking around cemeteries. I love being in cemeteries, and I love taking pictures of cemeteries. I find it sort of art and history and beauty, all and landscaping all put together. I find it fascinating and restful, and so I enjoy walking around cemeteries taking photos. So I decided that I would document as much of these cemeteries as possible. I wrote a little bit about each cemetery. If I could find some interesting stories, I put that in there. But it's largely just photographs, black and white photographs. Usually either 2 photographs to a page or 1 photograph to a page, and two cemeteries per book. I still have 1 more book to get all the cemeteries in Rockford, which I've been putting off doing. I haven't been putting it off, but the pandemic happened, and then I just haven't gotten back to doing it yet. But yeah, that's what that series is. I like that series, but you don't go into it expecting a lot of writing or text in it, because that isn't there. It's mostly photographs of cemeteries.
Without spoiling too much about them, what are some other books that you've written for your own Tales of Wonder and Dread imprint that we've not covered in this interview yet?
Okay, 2 of them that are not short stories, that are like longer pieces. The Homestead is one of those, and that one actually is not just my wife's favorite book of mine, but it's my wife's favorite book, period, which I'm kind of really very very amazed at that. But it's a story about there's a house sitting in an area of town, a mansion basically, and the area has sort of gone downhill over the years. And there's an elder couple who lives there, and these guys decide they're going to break into the place and steal everything. And they put together this semi, and they're going to pull it up. And one of the guys helped to put the security system into the place, so he knows how to get around it. And they break in, and that part goes just fine. But once they're in there, everything starts to go wrong, very wrong. And I won't give anything about what exactly is going on there, but let's just say that they're kind of in danger of losing their lives in the place after a while. And that's kind of a cool story. It's called The Homestead. It's basically a novella. It's kind of as long as some of the old novels, but newer novels tend to be longer. And then the other one is a novella called It Ends in the Graveyard, which that's kind of interesting. It came about as sort of I put together a writers group, and the idea was we all had criteria that we would put in, and we all had to write separate stories using these criteria. I don't remember all of them. One of them was that you had to have a snarky, sassy character. You had to have some kind of ancient book. There was a non-binary person. And I don't, oh, and it had to end in a graveyard, and there had to be a forest in there. So all those things are in it. Well, what happened was only myself and one other person actually finished our story. So there wasn't enough to put together a whole book, but I liked the main character in mind so well that I wound up expanding it out and making it a novella and putting it out called It Ends in the Graveyard. And it's a creature feature there's a monster, ancient monster lurking in this forest. And the main character who's actually telling the whole story is a famous horror writer, and kind of recounting it. And they are a very, very sassy person. And I think it's rather humorous. I think what I like so much about that book, I really love that book. I love that character because I love how snarky they are. And, it actually, there's a point in there, which I bring up in the comments afterward, where I'm literally poking fun at myself, not the character, but myself, because I've got some criticisms about Stephen King and his writing style. And this main character, is sort of modeled a little bit on Stephen King. And so the character says something like, well, if you have a problem with my writing, come back and talk to me after you've sold as many books as I have, and they've been adapted into movies that have done well at the box office. So that's kind of a dig at myself personally, because I think it's kind of ridiculous that I do have an issue with Stephen King's writing. But yeah, it's a fun book, I think. And the monster, I think, is kind of clever. It's pretty creepy, and it does end in the graveyard.
You mentioned your little beef with Stephen King that you have. So my next question is, do you have a typical writing routine? And if so, what is your writing routine like for you?
Well, I make a point. You write, you know what? You write every day. And by the way, the thing I have with Stephen King, we're exactly opposite in terms of writing style. I tend to be very minimalistic, and I swear, if he could get by with 10 words, he's going to use 50. But you know what? He sells a lot of books, so obviously he knows what he's doing. But I make a point. You write every day. People ask me, if you want to be a writer, what do? You write every day. You think about it. It's practice. I don't care what you're writing. You write, because that's how you get good at using words. You get in the habit of doing it. And, that's probably the main thing. I write every single day, and it can vary what I'm writing on, but I'm always writing on something. I've always usually got a number of projects going at once. And, that's the other thing. A lot of people talk about, writer's block. One of my favorite things for writer's block is if you're blocked on something, and it happens, definitely. Like I said, the Wizard Song sequel, I got to a point in there and I'm like, okay, where is this going? And So I walked away from it and worked on something else. Working on something else for a while is a really good way to get past the block on whatever it is you're working on. Um, so I guess my routine is you just write every single day. Um, that's it. And as far as a beef with Stephen King, it's just we have very different writing styles. I'd actually love to sit down with the man and talk to him because we do have a lot of similar interests in music and favorite authors. And, I think his story ideas are brilliant. It's just his writing style I'm not all that crazy about. I can't get through some of his stuff because it's just so wordy.
You have a YouTube channel called the Spooky Ventures. It's called Spooky Ventures. Uh, what you portray the character Scary Gary and D.B. Lovecraft in on that channel, and what can viewers expect from videos on your channel, and what are both of the characters you portray like?
Okay, so the channel we do a number of things on there. There are audiobook videos every Monday. Wednesdays I do reviews, and the reviews are done strictly as myself, Gary Hill. Um, and then Thursdays are radio shows, old radio shows set to video. And then Fridays, not every Friday, but some Fridays, we do spooky news segments. Um, and then on Tuesdays, again, not every Tuesday, although during spooky season, I've been doing one every 2 weeks. We do spooky movie time with Scary Gary. Scary Gary is a character I created. He's kind of your typical, I guess your typical horror movie host kind of guy. I give information about movies and show old movies. And then after about 2 episodes, I added this other character, D.B. Lovecraft. D.B. Lovecraft was a character that I introduced like 2 episodes in on Spooky Movie Time with Scary Gary, and he's the remote reporter. And I also have added him to Spooky News more recently. He and myself, Gary Hill, co-host Spooky News. But DB is kind of an interesting character. He's very ancient. He was a news reporter who broke the news about Napoleon surrendering. He used to send in articles by teletype, and he's also a dead man. And as far as the look of the character, he's kind of your typical Grim Reaper in a way, in that he's got a skull head, and skeleton hands, and a purple hooded robe, but also a news reporter microphone. And he's for a dead person, he's actually kind of funny, especially a dead person who does things on a spooky channel, because he's terrified of scary movies. And he also doesn't like ghosts at all, even though he's dead. He finds them annoying. And he gets very annoyed with a lot of things on the show and complains a lot. He's always heading off to HR to go complain about something. And, his voice is kind of weird. I play the character, the mouth on the mask doesn't move, so I can just record the audio separately. And I record it and process it to sort of sound demonic. I think he's a very fun character. At least I hope he's a fun character. That's what he's supposed to be. And he and Scary Gary don't necessarily get along that well. Scary Gary gets pretty annoyed with DB, and DB's always complaining about things. And so yeah, that's sort of the relationship between those two characters.
My final question for this interview: what was your writing for cable television programs like, and what cable television programs and channels did you write for?
Okay, I did just one show, and it was on G4 Network. They used to have Cops 2.0, and Cops 2.0 was they would show the episodes of Cops, and then they would have interactive content on there where people could go online and answer questions, and then we would give little informational things and stuff like that. And so I think I probably wrote about 3/4 of those episodes for all the interactive content, because there was another gentleman who was writing some of them at first, and then when the second batch of episodes came out, I think it was just me doing them. I think I was doing all of them the second time around. Um, yeah, that was a fun time. Getting, sitting and watching all those episodes and timing everything out so all the content fit at the right timing. Um, that was kind of cool. Um, oh, let me add one more thing about Scary Gary, if I can. Scary Gary is actually going to appear in a movie. There's a movie called Halloween Shark coming, I believe, sometime next year, from Will Colazzo and Julianne Prescott, and they're going to have me do Scary Gary as a TV horror host on a television in one of the scenes. So that'll be fun.
Gary, thank you for appearing on the Apollo Papyrus podcast. You were an interesting guest.
I strive to be interesting, sir. Thank you very much for having me.
It was fascinating to interview Gary, and I thank him for appearing on this podcast. This is Aaron Apollo Camp reminding y'all to find your writing and reading purpose. Have a safe and happy holiday season. Copyright 2024, Aaron Apollo Camp, all rights reserved. This podcast episode is intended for the private listening of our audience. Any reuse or retransmission of this episode without the express written consent of the podcast host is prohibited, except under fair use guidelines. Royalty-free music and sound effects obtained from https://www.zapsplat.com.